All right, the US Ambassador to Australia, Arthur Culverhouse, has been forced to downplay comments from Secretary of State Mike Pompeo right here on Sky News after Secretary Pompeo suggested the United States could simply disconnect, they were his words, simply disconnect from Australia if Victoria's trade deal with Beijing threatens telecommunications security.
We will not take any risk to our telecommunications infrastructure, any risk to the national security elements of what we need to do with our Five Eyes partners. We're going to protect and preserve the security of those institutions. So I don't know the nature of those projects precisely, but to the extent they have an adverse impact on our ability to protect telecommunications from our private citizens or security networks for our defense and intelligence communities, we will simply disconnect. We will simply separate. We're going to preserve trusted networks for important information. We hope our friends and partners and allies across the world, especially our Five Eyes partners like Australia, will do the same.
The Australian's political editor, Dennis Shanahan, joins me now. I think it's from Bateman's Bay, joining me now. Now, I've got to start there. We know, Dennis, of course, the federal government has all the constitutional powers in relation to telecommunications. It's not the states. That was a pretty pointed comment from Secretary Pompeo yesterday. It was in his Outsiders interview, and he makes it very clear here, like they are in the United Kingdom, the US are watching networks, they're watching Huawei, and clearly Culverhouse, the ambassador in Canberra, came out and sort of added to Pompeo's remarks, but it can't take away how firm he was yesterday.
Good evening, Peter, and in Canberra, by the way. That's why I've got the jumper on. Yes, the message was very clear from the US, and it goes back to what we were talking about last time, the Belt and Road in Victoria, the fact that Victoria has effectively signed a secretive agreement with a foreign government which has all sorts of potential overlays for national security and international relations. And that is what Mike Pompeo is saying. He admitted, he said, look, I don't know what the deal is, but if it affects anything, such as our communications technology and agreements with the Five Eye partners, and we've seen the UK move over the weekend, then this is a pretty clear message that steps will be taken, and it would be severe. Now, the US ambassador was very quick to come in and say, look, we're not threatening to disconnect Australia on the spot, and yes, these agreements don't cover telecommunications. Federal government has the responsibility for that. So it was all, there was a message, good cop, bad cop, but the message is there for Victoria and for the rest of Australia that having a state take up what is not been a transparent arrangement and an arrangement, the Belt and Road, which has been opposed within the region and across the world. I know that in the region, in the Asian region, there are countries that are very pleased. Australia has rejected a Belt and Road agreement nationally because they're not in a position to do so, but they do want people to stand up. So in this regard, Australia nationally has been standing up in the regional and national interest. The message for Victoria is that people want to know to what extent this agreement, which now seems to have more details emerging in the Australian today about who was being paid what for what advice, then this is a message for Victoria and for the rest of Australia. It is a very vexed situation for us to have a state signing an agreement which affects our international relations. It's not a question of trade. The states do have a role in trade, and for years have had their own commissions all over the world, in China and Britain and the US, but that's fine. This is a completely different agreement involving billions of dollars, which can lead, as we have seen in the Pacific, to white elephant debt traps, where where China can come in and control projects and the fate of those projects, as well as the bidders for those projects, by using its financial muscle and its Belt and Road agreement. This is very dangerous for Victoria.
Yeah, look, I've got Michael O'Brien on the show after the break, and I've got a report now from the Parliamentary Library in Canberra with a whole series of examples of that debt trap problem you're talking about there. It's in our region and beyond. I can't fathom how a state of Australia can make an agreement like a national government can with the Chinese government in this instance, how so much of it can stay secret, how it wasn't a big issue in the election campaign, it certainly wasn't disclosed in any detail, that the Victorian opposition can't ask them questions like you can in Canberra through an estimates process. When pointedly asked in a hearing the other day with the infrastructure minister in Victoria, she declined to say how much of the $25 billion that they're currently borrowing is actually coming from China. We don't know the level of Chinese workers or Chinese investment per se over project and project. We know, for example, in Sri Lanka, they couldn't pay the repayments on their port. That port has now been repossessed by the Chinese and they use it for naval exercises. I mean, this money could be going to ports in Melbourne, in Victoria. It could be involved in large infrastructure projects, roads, bridges, what else? Are they going to be owned by the Chinese? These are the real problems here, Dennis, and the lack of transparency. This is like a South American dictatorship. I mean, it is that bad, the level of transparency.